My name is Tom. I'm 72 years old, and for most of my life, I've done two things: work with my hands and keep my word. I come from a generation that believed a man was his deeds, not his talk. I was an Air Force mechanic, then spent nearly 40 years turning a wrench in my own garage on the edge of our little town here in Ohio. That garage fed my family, paid for my kids' college tuition. That's Sarah and Michael, and let me build the house where the floorboards still creak under my wife Ellen's feet. I'm not complaining. It was a good life, an honest one. I never asked for much. My old Ford F-150 that I still tinker with on weekends, a morning cup of black coffee on the back porch, and a little peace and quiet. And then, there was my collection. It wasn't just a pile of steel and wood, like Ellen thought. Every rifle, every revolver in my safe was a piece of history. My history. My family's history. This country's history. From an old Winchester 1894 my granddad traded 2 cows for during the Great Depression, to the M1 Garand, the spitting image of the one I carried in Nam. 50 years I spent gathering them, cleaning them, cherishing them. It wasn't just a hobby. It was my legacy. The only thing I figured I'd leave behind besides memories. And I thought my kids understood that. I was wrong. Folks, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up so more people can hear this story. Let me know what city you're watching from in the comments. It all started with a pain in my chest, sharp, like a knife twisting. I was changing the oil in the pickup when the world just grayed out. Next thing I know, I'm staring at the blinding lights of an ICU, listening to the beeping of machines that I guess were the only thing keeping me on this side of the dirt. Double bypass. Sounds as serious as it felt. I was laid up in that hospital for nearly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of hell made of IV drips, needles, and tasteless jello. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was waiting for me at home. When I finally got back, leaning on Michael's arm, the house felt wrong. Quiet. Too quiet. Ellen fussed over me, fluffing pillows, but she wouldn't meet my eye. Sarah drove in from the next state over, gave me a hug, but it felt hollow, guilty. I chalked it up to stress. They'd been worried sick about me, of course. I walked past my den and glanced at the corner where the big steel safe stood. It was there. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It's okay. Stupid old man, what were you worried about? The first week, I barely got out of bed. The weakness was so profound. Walking to the bathroom felt like climbing a mountain. By the second week, I was feeling a bit more human. The doctor said I needed to move around. I decided it was time to visit my old friends, see if they'd missed me. I took the key from the hook behind the portrait of my parents, where it always hung. My hands trembled as I fit it into the lock. A turn, a click, another turn of the handle. The heavy door swung open, and I froze. The safe was empty. Bone dry, stripped bare, empty. The green velvet-lined walls where my treasures once hung in perfect order were just blank. Every single one was gone. Grandpa's Winchester, my M1 Garand, the rare Colt Python I'd hunted for 10 years, the Browning shotgun my father gave me for my 30th birthday. Everything, 50 years of my life, my passion, my memory, gone. My ears started ringing. I grabbed the edge of the safe door to keep from falling. I couldn't get a breath. That pain in my chest was back, but this time it was different. It was a dull, heavy ache. It wasn't coming from my heart. It was coming from my soul. "Ellen!" My voice came out as a rasp, like a stranger's. She came into the room, wiping her hands on her apron. The second she saw my face, then the open safe, she froze. Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape. "Tom, honey, you can't get worked up. Where are they?" I cut her off, trying to keep my voice steady, but it cracked. "Where is my collection, Ellen?" She looked down at the floor. "Tom, we decided it was for the best." "We?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Who is we?" "Me, Sarah, and Michael," she whispered. "While you were in the hospital, the doctors said, they said your heart was weak, that any stress, having guns in the house, it's dangerous. We were scared." I stared at her. This woman I'd lived with for half a century, the woman who knew what every single one of those rifles meant to me. Scared? I let out a short, bitter laugh. "So you sold them?" She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "The money went to pay for the hospital bills. We put the rest aside for your recovery. We did it for your own good, Tom. For my own good." They had ripped out my heart, stomped on my soul, erased my history, and they called it a kindness. I looked at the bare walls of that safe and felt a wave of devastation so total I hadn't felt anything like it since Nam, when I'd lost buddies. But that was war. There were enemies. And here, this was my family, my wife, my children. I turned without a word and shuffled out to the back porch. I sank into my old rocking chair. Its familiar creak sounded like a funeral dirge for my legacy. I watched the sun go down, watched the long shadows stretch across the yard I'd tended with my own two hands. And in that crushing silence, for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly alone. Betrayed. Humiliated by the very people I had lived for. The creak of the rocking chair was the only sound in my world. My ears were still ringing with the emptiness of that safe. Every movement sent a phantom pain through my chest, right where the surgeons had left their scar. But that scar was nothing compared to the one they'd just burned into my soul. "We did it for your own good." The phrase turned over and over in my head, like a broken record. Whose good? Theirs? Or mine? The man they'd turned into a ghost in his own house. I closed my eyes and the memories came flooding back, not like a gentle tide, but like a dam bursting. They weren't faded or blurry. Each one was sharp as a gunshot. I'm 12 years old, standing next to my grandpa Jacob in the yard behind his farmhouse. The air smells like cut grass and gunpowder. Grandpa, tall and thin as a fence post, with hands like the roots of an old oak tree, holds it out to me. The Winchester 1894. The wood of the stock, polished smooth by 1,000 touches, is warm and alive. The steel of the barrel is cool, smelling of gun oil. "This ain't a toy, Tommy," he says in his low, gravelly voice. "It's a tool, and it's history. I traded 2 of my best milk cows for it back in '32. Your grandma didn't speak to me for a week. Said I'd traded milk for a hunk of metal. Then the hard times came, and this hunk of metal put food on our table more than once, and kept folks worse than wolves off our land. He didn't just teach me to shoot. He taught me respect. Respect for the power held in that piece of steel and wood. Never point it at anything you ain't willing to destroy. Always treat it like it's loaded, and always know what's behind your target." I held that Winchester, and I was holding my family's history, a history of survival. Then came Vietnam, the mud, the fear, the humid, suffocating jungle air, and the constant feeling that death was breathing down your neck. My only reliable friend over there was an M1 Garand. Heavy, dependable, never failed me. It was an extension of my arm. I cleaned it obsessively because I knew my life depended on it. When I came back, I couldn't sleep for months. The jungle was always there, behind my eyes. Then, at a gun show, I found it. An M1 Garand, the spitting image of my service rifle. I brought it home, took it apart, cleaned it, oiled it. Holding it in my hands, the tremors in my body would quiet down. It wasn't a trophy. It was an anchor to the world of the living. Ellen never got that. Why do you need that monster in the house? It just reminds you of the war. She didn't understand that it reminded me I had survived. And the Browning .5 shotgun. Dad gave it to me for my 30th birthday. It was the first time we'd gone duck hunting, just the two of us, without his buddies, father and son. We sat in a cold, damp blind on the shore of Lake Erie, our breath turning to steam, our fingers numb. We barely shot a thing, but we talked. For the first time in our lives, we really talked. About his job at the plant, my plans for the garage, about fears, about hopes. He told me then, son, work is important. Family is more important. But a man's got to have something that's just his, something for his soul, so you don't lose yourself in the shuffle. When I held that Browning, I could feel the cold morning mist and the warmth of my father's shoulder next to me all over again. Every single piece. I chased after that Colt Python, 3.57 Magnum, for 10 years, drove to dozens of shows, scoured hundreds of ads. Finally found one owned by a retired cop over in Pennsylvania. We sat in his garage, that smelled of gasoline and old newspapers, and talked for 3 hours. He told me how that revolver had saved his life during a robbery. He wasn't just selling me a gun, he was passing on a piece of his story. I paid him more than he asked, because I wasn't buying an object. I was buying a legend. Then came the kids, Sarah and Michael. When they were little, I'd sometimes take out Grandpa's Winchester. I'd let them hold it while I stood right there. I'd tell them the story of the 2 cows, tell them about their great-grandpa Jacob, who they'd never met. I thought I was planting seeds, seeds of respect for the past, for their roots. I taught Michael to shoot a .22 when he was 14, not for hunting, for discipline, for responsibility. This isn't a video game, son. There's no reset button. Every action has a consequence. He'd nodded then, his eyes bright. It seemed like he understood. I remembered scrimping and saving for every new piece, saying no to a new fishing rod or a trip with my buddies. Instead, I'd tuck away $50, maybe $100 a month in an old coffee can. Ellen would grumble, spending money on your hunks of junk again. You could have redone the kitchen. I did redo the kitchen, and I replaced the roof. And I bought her a new car when her old one started giving up the ghost. I did it all, but the hunks of junk were mine, my quiet harbor. If I'd known then that in my old age I'd become a ghost at my own family's functions, I'd have bought myself a boat and a cabin on a lake, instead of putting everything into them and their future. I built this house. I grew this garden. I paid for their degrees so they could be better than us. Sarah's a lawyer. Michael's a manager at some tech company. They live in different cities, in big houses, drive fancy cars. They speak a different language, a language of efficiency, optimization, and personal boundaries. In their world, there's no room for an old Winchester. It doesn't fit their polished decor. It's too real. The creak of the chair stopped. Sarah had come out onto the porch. She was holding a mug of something steaming, probably some herbal tea. I only ever drank black coffee. Dad, you okay? She sat on the step nearby. Mom said you were upset. Upset? What a soft, useless word. Like I was a kid who'd had his candy taken away. Did your mother tell you the truth? I asked, not turning my head. She sighed. Dad, we did what we had to do. The doctors were very clear. No stress, no access to things like that. What if something happened? What if you got depressed after the surgery? We couldn't take that risk. Risk? I finally turned to her, looked her in the eye. You're a lawyer, Sarah. You know what property is? What rights are? You went into my house, into my private safe, while I was unconscious and sold what belonged to me. That's called theft. She flinched at my tone. It's not theft. We didn't keep the money. It all went to your bills. Look at it practically. They were just things. Old, dangerous things. Now you have a financial cushion. A financial cushion. I looked at my daughter, at her well-kept face, her expensive cashmere sweater, and I knew we were living in different universes. She saw assets. I saw life. Tell me something, Sarah, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. What was the price you got for my family's history? How much did you get for your great-grandfather's memory? What was the going rate for the rifle that saved my life? Put a price on my legacy for me. She couldn't answer. She just sat there and stared at me with her big, frightened eyes. She didn't get it. Not her, not Michael, not even Ellen. They thought they were saving my life. But what they really did was take it away from me. Once and for all, a week went by. A week of thick, suffocating silence. Ellen tiptoed around the house, placing plates of food in front of me that I barely touched, and sighing. Sarah went back to her big city, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and a guilt she tried to mask with cheerful phone calls. Dad, are you taking your vitamins? Don't forget to get some fresh air, Michael called less often. His voice was strained, full of talk about work, his kids, anything but the one thing that mattered. They were all waiting for me to come around, to get over it, to swallow it, like I'd always done. I had been silent for decades. I had swallowed their disrespect in small doses for years, the way they'd chuckle at my old-fashioned views at family dinners, the way teenage Michael would roll his eyes. Dad, nobody listens to that music anymore. The way Sarah, the lawyer, would condescendingly explain why my ideas of honor and duty were not relevant in the modern discourse. I put up with it. I didn't start fights. I held it together for the family. I thought that was wisdom. It turns out it was weakness, and they had smelled it on me, like predators smell blood. I started leaving the house a little, short walks down our quiet street. Neighbors would wave, nod sympathetically. How you doing, Tom? Heard you were under the weather. I'd nod back. None of them knew the real sickness wasn't in my body. The point of no return came on a Saturday. The phone rang that morning. It was Michael. He sounded unusually cheerful. Dad, hey, listen. I've got some news. Remember I told you I was up for a promotion? Well, I got it. I'm senior vice president now. Congratulations, son, I said. My voice was flat, empty. Thanks. Listen, we're having a little party at our house next weekend to celebrate. Inviting colleagues, some partners. You know, it's a big deal. Linda and I were hoping you and Mom could make it. There was a slight pause on the line. I waited. But, Dad... He hesitated. There's one thing. You know, there are going to be some important people there. My boss, some investors. Let's just agree. You're not going to bring up the gun thing. It's in the past. No need to ruin the party for everyone. Just come as a guest. Be happy for me. Something inside me snapped. A loud, clean break. Like a firing pin hitting a primer. I had been silent for 20 years, but it seems I had swallowed more than I should have. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. I'm supposed to drive down there, smile, shake hands with your important people, and pretend that nothing happened? Pretend my own son, the one I broke my back for 40 years, didn't rob me while I was lying in a hospital bed? Dad, stop it. His voice turned hard. I'm not having this discussion. I didn't rob you. We were trying to save your life, and frankly, you're being selfish. This is the biggest moment of my career, and all you can think about are your stupid hunks of junk. Selfish. That word hit me right in the gut. Me, who passed on a new truck so he could afford his first year of university. Me, who spent hundreds of hours under the hood of his beat-up Honda so he could go on dates. Me. Selfish. I understand, Michael, I said. A cold, crystal calm washed over me. Don't worry, I won't ruin your party. I won't be there. Good, he snapped. Maybe by then, you'll have cooled off and started thinking rationally. He hung up. I sat there holding the dead phone, staring at a spot on the wall. That was the second blow, and it was worse than the first. The sale of the collection was a betrayal. This phone call was an erasure. They hadn't just taken my past. They wanted to delete my present, to turn me into a convenient, quiet old man for the background of their lives. A piece of furniture. I stood up, walked to the window. A fine, dreary rain was falling. As gray and hopeless as my life had felt for weeks, but inside me, the rain had stopped. A fire was starting to burn. A quiet, cold, furious fire. The fire of justice. Enough. I would not be silent anymore. I would not swallow this. I would not be convenient. I wasn't going to scream or break dishes or write angry posts on the internet like their generation would. I was going to do this my way, like a man, firmly, and with dignity. I put on my old work jacket, grabbed the keys to the pickup, and walked out of the house. Ellen called something after me, but I didn't look back. I climbed into my old Ford, the cab smelling of gasoline, oil, and my life. I turned the key. The engine roared to life with a familiar growl. I pulled out onto the road. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't just driving. I was on my way to get something back. Not my rifles. I was on my way to get my name back. My honor. My life. My old F-150 rolled over the wet asphalt. The wipers swished back and forth, their monotonous rhythm clearing the rain from the windshield. For years, my life had been like that, moving along the same track. Home, work, home. Duty, responsibility, family. I thought that was the right road, but sometimes the road just leads you to a dead end. I was driving with no destination in mind, just getting away from the house and its choking silence. I passed my old garage. A new name was on the sign. The kid I sold it to was a decent mechanic, but he had no soul for it. I knew he'd never sit with a customer for an extra hour just to talk about fishing or baseball. For him, it was a business. For me, it had been a calling. Thoughts tumbled around in my head like rocks in a cement mixer. Anger, hurt, bitterness. But through that chaos, a cold, clear stream of resolve began to form. What could I do? Sue my own family? Sarah was a lawyer. She'd twist it to make me look like a senile old man and claim they were acting in my best interest. Cause a scene? Drive down to Michael's party and blow the whole thing up. That would just look like an old man's tantrum. they'd come out clean again. See, we told you he wasn't well. Number one Shabbat couldn't fight them with their weapons, not with noise, with strength. The strength of the truth. I pulled into a small diner on the outskirts of town. Joe's Place. The same spot where I'd had lunch with the guys from the garage almost every day for 30 years. I sat at a booth by the window and ordered a black coffee. The hot, bitter liquid cleared my head a little. My strength wasn't in my fists or in money I didn't have. My strength was in my story, my reputation. In this town, people knew me. They knew Tom Miller, the honest mechanic, the veteran, the man whose word was his bond. And that was the very thing they had tried to take from me by painting me as an incompetent old fool. Then the idea hit me, simple as a hammer strike, but maybe the most powerful tool I had. Our town has a small weekly paper, the County Herald. Everyone reads it, from the mayor to the farmers on the county line. It has a column called Voice of the People, where any resident could publish a letter. About potholes, school events, whatever. Mostly, it was small stuff. But every now and then, a story would appear in that column that got the whole town talking. I finished my coffee, left a couple of bucks on the table, and drove to the paper's office. It was an old 2-story brick building downtown. The air inside smelled of paper and printer's ink. Ronnie Hudson, the editor, was sitting behind a cluttered desk. I'd known him for 30 years. I used to fix his old Chevy. "Tom, what brings you here?" He took off his reading glasses. "You're not looking so hot. Heard you were on the sick list." "I was, Ronnie," I said, sitting in the chair across from him. "But I'm here about something else. I need some space in your column." He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Voice of the People? You? You've never written a word." "There's a first time for everything," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I have a story that I think people need to hear." He leaned back in his squeaky office chair. "This about your family?" In a small town, news travels faster than fire. Someone at the hospital must have talked. One of the neighbors must have heard something. "This is about honor, Ronnie," I said firmly. "It's about dignity, and it's about what people turn into when they think they can get away with anything." I told him everything. No emotion, just the facts, the hospital, the empty safe, the phone call with Michael, the hunks of junk, and the selfishness. He listened in silence, not interrupting, just frowning. When I finished, a long silence hung in the office. "Well, damn," he finally said. "That's quite a story. You want me to print this?" "I want you to print my letter, word for word." I pulled a few folded sheets of paper from my jacket pocket. I'd been up all night writing it, choosing the words, not to get pity, but to make people think. Ronnie took the pages, put his glasses back on, and began to read. I watched his expression change. The letter was simple. I titled it, "On the Price of a Legacy." I started by introducing myself. Thomas Miller, Air Force veteran, mechanic, a man who'd lived his whole life in this town. And I wanted to tell a story about trust and betrayal. I didn't make direct accusations. I just described how I built my collection, what each piece meant to me. I told the story of Grandpa and his Winchester, of the M1 Garand that was my anchor after Vietnam, of my father's shotgun. Then I wrote about the hospital, about fighting for my life, and about coming home to find that my legacy, 50 years of my life's passion, had been sold without my knowledge or consent. I wrote that I understood my family's fear for my health, But I couldn't understand why that fear had to turn into an act of profound disrespect, an erasure of my identity. And then I wrote the most important part. I was told they were just dangerous things. I was told I should forget them and think rationally. That my passion, my history, was nothing more than old hunks of junk, and that I was selfish for even daring to feel a loss. Maybe for the new generation, that's the truth. Maybe in their world, where anything can be bought and sold, where history fits in a short video on a phone, and honor is an outdated concept. There's no room for something like a legacy. But I am from a different time, a time when a man's word was his bond, when family history wasn't an empty phrase, when respect had to be earned, not demanded. I don't want the money from the sale of my collection. They can keep it. They can buy whatever it is they think is important. But they should know they didn't just sell some rifles. They sold a memory. They sold a history. And they sold a piece of my soul. I'm not writing this for sympathy. I'm writing this so that other men of my generation, the veterans, the working men, the fathers who poured their lives into their families, will know that when you stay silent, it isn't always mistaken for wisdom. Sometimes it's mistaken for weakness. And sometimes you have to find your voice, not to shout, but to be heard. It was signed, Thomas Miller, veteran, collector, father. Ronnie finished reading. He took off his glasses and looked at me. "I'm putting this on the front page, Tom," he said quietly. "Not in the column. This will be the lead story. People need to read this." I nodded. I thanked him and left. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds. I got in my pickup and drove home. I didn't feel vindictive or vengeful. I felt a sense of release. Like a heavy weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I had spoken my piece. Now, my words would take on a life of their own. I didn't cancel my daughter's mortgage payment, like I'd thought about doing in a flash of anger. That was petty. I didn't drive to her brother's party to cause a scene. I just told the truth, quietly, with dignity, and to our entire little world. And I knew the fallout from that would be more powerful than any bomb. The paper came out on Thursday. I picked up my copy from the mailbox at dawn, like always. There it was on the front page, under a bold headline. A veteran asks, "What's a legacy worth?" Ronnie had run an old photo of me next to it, from my Air Force days. I looked so young, so full of hope. I read the article. They were my words, but seeing them in newsprint gave them weight. They were no longer the ramblings of a bitter old man. They were a document, a testimony. The first half of the day, nothing happened. The silence in the house was thicker than ever. Ellen placed my breakfast in front of me without a word and retreated to her room. I knew she'd seen the paper, and then it began. The first call was from Bill Henderson, an old Marine I knew from the local American Legion post. "Tom?" "It's Bill." I read it. "God damn it, Tom. I got no words. You did the right thing. Me and the boys, we got your back. You need anything, you just say the word." His voice, usually loud and booming, was full of genuine empathy. Next was Jimmy Carter, who owned the auto shop on the other side of town. We'd been friendly competitors for decades, but there was always respect. "Miller." "Carter. Saw your letter. Can't believe I'm saying this, but you're a stand-up guy. What they did, that ain't right. If your kids think that's how you treat your old man, they need a lesson in life." The calls kept coming. Old customers, neighbors, people I barely knew. They didn't pry or offer empty pity. They just said, We're with you, Mr. Miller. You wrote what needed to be said. You hang in there. Around noon, an unfamiliar pickup truck pulled into my driveway. A sturdy man in his 40s, dressed in work clothes, got out and walked to the door. I opened it. Mr. Miller, my name is Frank Riley. I read your article and… Here. He handed me a long canvas gun case. I took it, confused. It was heavy. What is this? I asked. Open it. He smiled. I unzipped the case. Inside, nestled on the soft padding, was a Winchester 1894. Not mine, but a beautiful one. Old, cared-for wood, blued steel. My dad was a collector, Frank said. He passed last year. This rifle's just been sitting in his safe. I'm not a hunter. My son isn't either. When I read your story, I knew where this belonged. It's not a gift. Think of it as a loan, an indefinite loan, until you find yours. Just so your safe isn't empty. A lump formed in my throat. Me, a man who hadn't cried since he left Vietnam, felt the sting in my eyes. I can't take this, I managed to say. Yes, you can, he said firmly. My dad's collection was his legacy, too. He would have understood. For us simple guys, these are more than just things. They're anchors. He shook my hand, a firm man's handshake, and left. And I stood there on my porch, holding a stranger's Winchester that, in that moment, felt like the most precious thing in the world. I carried it to my den and placed it in the empty safe. It no longer looked like a coffin. It was a repository again. A home not just for my history, but for a history built on respect. The call from Sarah came late in the afternoon. She was screaming, "Dad, what have you done? You've humiliated us in front of the whole town. Mom's friends are calling. Michael's boss called him. He read the article online. You could ruin his career." "No, Sarah," I answered calmly, without a trace of anger. He started ruining his career the moment he decided his father was a line item on a budget. I just told the truth. If you don't like the way the truth looks, well, that's something you're all going to have to live with. "We were trying to do what was best," she sobbed. "I know," I said, and it was true. I knew their motive was rooted in a misguided fear, not malice. But it didn't excuse the act. But sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You didn't leave me any other choice. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel any satisfaction from her tears. I just felt a quiet, bitter sadness and release. That evening, sitting in my rocker on the back porch, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight to get the old collection back. Those pieces were tainted now. They no longer held the stories I had invested in them. I would let them go. My new life began the next morning. I woke up, and for the first time in weeks, the ache in my chest was almost gone. I drank my black coffee and drove down to the American Legion Hall. Bill and the other vets greeted me with applause. We sat there in their smoky hall, drinking terrible coffee from a machine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was home, among my own, among men who spoke my language, the language of duty, honor, and quiet understanding. I told them about Frank and his Winchester. One of the old-timers, a Korea vet named Chuck, grunted and said, "I've got an old M1 collecting dust in my garage. Hands are too shaky to give it the care it deserves anymore. How about you and me work on it together, Tom? Bring it back to life." The idea was born right there, in that hall. We decided to start a club at the Legion. Not just a gun club, a historical preservation society. We would find old, forgotten firearms, not to hoard them, but to restore them, to research their history, and to pass that knowledge on to the younger generation, to teach them not just how to shoot, but how to respect the story behind the steel and wood, the stories of veterans, of farmers, of this country. I stopped waiting for my children to call. A few days later, Ellen tried to talk about reconciliation, about how Michael and Sarah are so sorry. I just looked at her. Sorry is a word, Ellen. Actions are actions. They need time to understand what they did, and I need time. Maybe someday we can all sit down at the same table and talk, but it will be on my terms. I didn't get my collection back, but I got back something far more valuable. I got back my voice, my self-respect, and a purpose. Sometimes, I still sit on my back porch, cleaning that Winchester that Frank brought me. The creak of the rocking chair no longer sounds like a funeral march. It sounds like the rhythm of a new life, one that is quiet, meaningful, and my own. I don't know if my kids will ever truly understand, and to be honest, it doesn't matter as much as it used to. I forgave myself for decades of silence, and that was enough to start breathing freely again.